All right, folks, welcome back to NewsOne Now. In September, Doug Jones was attending the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation ALC weekend. Had a chance to catch up with him. And I want to play for you because he talked about what he needed to win. This is what he said just a few months ago.
Because these conversations affect the very heart of democracy. I mean, the right to vote, access to the ballot boxes is at the very heart of who we are as a people and as a country. And if we start restricting that access, if we start denying people the right to vote, we really lose a significant voice in our government. And so these discussions are very important. We have to be aware of what's going on. We have to be aware of where we're headed, and to make sure that everybody, regardless of race, color, religion, whatever, has that same unfettered right to the ballot box. I think people need to, first of all, I think they need to educate themselves about what's going on, what's really happening, and the motives behind some of these so-called voter fraud commissions that are designed to keep people from voting and keep that and restrict that access to the ballot box. They can get engaged in their communities. I think the most important thing is to get involved in campaigns on a very local level, a state level, to make sure people understand the right to vote, because that's where it all comes from. It bubbles up from the very bottom up to the top, and that's where people need to get engaged and make sure their local officials are protecting their right to vote. You know, I've worked for fairness and equality and social justice all my life, and when I see people that really want to be engaged in the electoral process being denied that right, it really affects me as well as it does all the people that are supporting me. I want to make sure that I'm going to be a voice in the United States Senate, a strong voice, to make sure that everybody has the right to participate.
Well, yesterday and last night in Alabama, of course, black turnout was critical, and trust me, folks were trying their best to keep folks from turning out. Joining us right now is Kristen Clarke, President and Executive Director, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. Kristen, y'all were pretty busy last night. Explain to folks what you were hearing, what you were having to deal with.
So we definitely saw the power of the black vote yesterday, but most certainly we saw the power of the black vote exercised in the face of ongoing voter suppression and obstacles to the ballot box every step of the way. Yesterday, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law led its election protection effort. The phones were busy all day. We took complaints from voters across the state of Alabama from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. when the polls closed. And we heard about reports of voter intimidation. We heard reports of poll workers who were turning away voters if the address in the book didn't match the address on the driver's license. They've got a strict photo ID law on the books in Alabama that actually has a heavier burden on black voters, but it's for identification purposes only. And we saw some poll workers who were insisting that people provide the ID to show where they live, and that's not required under law. We received reports about hostile election officials in Raymer, Alabama. We received reports about concerns about ballots being discarded. They have a straight ticket rule in Alabama. If you designate yourself as part of the Republican Party, then you automatically vote for all of the Republican candidates on the ballot, for example. But there's some folks who are Democrats who decided to vote for Moore and vice versa, Republicans who decided to vote for Jones. And there was some confusion about whether poll workers would discard ballots where you had a flip situation.
There also were two ballots, because normally there's one ballot. I understand that was one ballot for the senatorial race, then there was another ballot for the state races.
That's right. There was a federal election, but in some parts of Alabama, you had local and state races on the ballot as well. In all of these instances, we were the ones pulling people from the brink of disenfranchisement, arming them with accurate information about the law, and enabling them to go back in and insist on being able to vote.
Also, I saw there was one tweet where someone reported that like 3 police cars showed up at a voting location and were also looking at checking IDs as well.
That's right. Sadly, voter intimidation continues to be a problem across the state of Alabama. And despite that, we saw African Americans turning out in high numbers. They were able to overcome those obstacles, exercise the right to vote, and we saw the power of the black vote in a very significant way yesterday. Today, we've got to stay focused. There's still a lot of work to do. It's important that we remember that Alabama is the birthplace of the Voting Rights Act, but sadly a place where we're still wrestling with voter intimidation and voter suppression. We know that blacks turned out in high numbers, but let's not forget that this election was very racially polarized. We saw black voters politically cohesive behind one candidate, and white voters in a very significant way voting in for the opposite candidate. So it's against that backdrop of racially polarized voting and voter intimidation that we're still working to fight the photo ID law. Our friends at LDF have a federal lawsuit challenging that photo ID law, which has a disproportionate impact on black voters. There's still some people who lose the right to vote in Alabama if they've been convicted of a crime of so-called moral turpitude. And we've got a big voting rights lawsuit in this state because the 3 highest courts in the state of Alabama are all white. There's not a single African American who sits on those courts because they elect their judges statewide, and white voters routinely vote as a solid block to defeat judges who are backed by black voters. So there's still a lot of work to do to correct a lot of the injustice when it comes to voting in Alabama.
Spencer.
So your Lawyers Committee, Election Protection, is the premier election protection organization really in the country here in terms of protecting the right to vote. So you talked a little bit about next steps, but give us more about what you all are doing in terms of next steps with regard to election protection.
Well, we take the data and we identify patterns. So today we will circle back with the Secretary of State. We'll circle back with local election officials to say, hey, your poll workers need better training. We had a lot of people who were on the inactive list yesterday. And if you aren't on the inactive list, you have the opportunity to confirm your voting eligibility, to confirm your address, and vote on the machines, vote a regular ballot like everyone else. But a lot of those people were turned away. So today we're going to do our work, follow up with state and local officials around the state to make sure that they do a better job training their people to operate and run elections better going forward. At the federal level, we're going to keep fighting back. We've got this administration's Dangerous Election Integrity Commission, which is laying the groundwork for voter suppression across the country. And then we've got a hostile Attorney General who is not committed to real enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. So we're going to keep pressure to bear on those folks and make sure that we shift the narrative and stop pushing for voter suppression and continue to push how important it is that we strengthen our elections and make it easier for people to have their voices heard in our democracy.
Kristen, in the federal government, they've got 10 circuit court judges they've already approved, another 24 that are pending. Did you see anything yesterday? I'm wondering that you might be able to fold into further litigation, because I mean Shelby County versus Holder, of course Shelby County is Birmingham suburbs, and it went for Roy Moore yesterday. So I mean, did you see anything in terms of voter suppression, even though they kicked out Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, that might fit under Section 5 or rise to a Section 5 violation yesterday?
What we know is that voter suppression and voter intimidation remain alive and well, and most certainly in Louisiana. The complaints that we got by way of our 866 Our Vote hotline yesterday made that clear. There are at least 3 major federal voting rights cases that are pending in the state of Alabama. And then we've got AG Jeff Sessions, who's asleep at the wheel. So there's still a lot of work to do. An important victory yesterday, but still a lot of work to do to ensure that we have fair elections across the state of Alabama and frankly all across the country.
What I found most stunning was just how loud the political views were being voiced by state officials, like the Secretary of State. What are the challenges you face now in this aftermath of yesterday's election, with the margin being so tight and Moore still saying he wants to contest or call for a recount? I know there's not going to be an automatic recount now because the margin was too high for that. But what now? What are the challenges, and why should we support your work financially for that?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a recount here. I think the margin of difference between the candidates was fairly substantial. We want to make sure that every vote is counted, and one thing that we will do is make sure that election officials counted every absentee ballot that may have come in, for example. But now it's time to move forward. Now it's time to focus on the future. Now's the time to focus on shutting down the Election Integrity Commission. Now's the time to focus on pushing this Justice Department to enforce the Voting Rights Act and other federal civil rights laws, and looking ahead to 2018 to make sure that all African American voters are able to freely participate in elections wherever they happen, in Alabama or elsewhere across the country.
All right, then, for folks who want to support the Lawyers Committee?
Please go to our website, lawyerscommittee.org, hit that donate button. We are working overtime to defend access to the ballot box across the country.
So not sure this is going to be your last time on the show before we go off. We certainly thanks for all the work you've done.
So grateful for your work, your leadership, and the platform that you provide for us to talk about the Black struggle and the Black freedom struggle effort in our country. Thank you, Roland.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.